Anno Domini. Otto II's son, Otto III, was just 3 when he became king. But he grew into an extraordinary, visionary boy. Steeped in scripture, he had a vision of a restored empire under the rule of God, with the Pope and the Emperor as its joint figureheads. Otto III appointed the first German Pope, Gregory V, who also happened to be his cousin. Coincidence? You decide. Otto was finally crowned as Holy Roman Emperor in Rome on Ascension Day 996. And though he lived in luxury and magnificent new-build palace on the Aventine, he would at times shed his royal clothes and go on a pilgrimage. He was aware, as so many others were, that the times were getting short. How short, no one quite knew. Part of the problem was working out which year you were in the first place. In the Roman Empire, the years were reckoned by the reigns of various Roman emperors and consuls. For example, the 16th year of Augustus, the 7th year of, that bloke, what's his name? The one with the big nose and the laurel crown, that sort of thing. But when Diocletian came along, no Christian wanted to date anything with his name. So they renamed that era the era of the martyrs. A monk called Dionysius Exiguus, that is, Denis the Small, or Denis the Little, or you might say Denis the Dwarf, thought that time should be recalibrated to date from the arrival of the King of Kings. So he restarted the numbering of years from the date of the incarnation of Jesus, so that the beginning of our hope may be better known to us, as he put it. Sadly, he got the dates wrong. In fact, no one knows how Dionysius came to the date that he chose for the birth of Jesus. But he was at least 4 years too late, because Dionysius' year 1 was 4 years after the death of Herod the Great. So historically, we get the curious anomaly that Jesus was actually born around 5 years before Christ. The BC option, though, was only added in the 18th century, which explains why AD is Latin, Anno Domini, and BC is English. Dionysius' system took a long time to catch on. In the 8th century in Rome, the years were dated from the date of the resurrection, which they took as AD 33. But Bede chose to use Dionysius' system in his ecclesiastical history, which was a huge hit on the continent, and from then on it was dominant in dating. But the effect of adopting this new system meant that suddenly people realised that it was nearly the year 1000, and everyone knew what that meant. It meant that Jesus would return. The return of the King. The idea came from the book of Revelation, of course. John on Patmos had seen the evil one thrown into a pit and sealed shut for 1,000 years. Augustine had argued strongly that the whole thing was symbolic, but how could he be sure? And the times were pretty terrible. They were marauding Hungarians riding around. At one point they even held the Frankish ruler, Louis IV, prisoner. In Paris, a priest preached a sermon to a startled congregation, warning them that the Antichrist would arrive the moment that 1,000 years had been completed. He was quickly shouted down by one of his colleagues, but the damage was done. It was a conspiracy, man. By New Year's Eve, 999, expectation had reached a peak. A crowd gathered outside the papal palace in Rome. Usually when a crowd gathered there, it was for the removal and expulsion of a pope, but this time they wanted him to pray, because the end was nigh. Midnight came. Nothing happened. The end apparently was not so nigh after all. So the Pope gave them a blessing and sent them home. This failure did not put off the millennial prophets. They merely recalculated. Maybe the 1,000 years should be calculated from Christ's death and resurrection in AD 30. Certainly they were apocalyptic, earth-shattering events. In 1010, news reached Europe of the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem by the messianic Muslim Caliph Al-Hakim bi Amr Allah, the so-called Mad Caliph. The caliph's behaviour grew more and more eccentric. Finally, in February 1021, at the age of 36, he went out in the night to the hills outside Cairo and never returned. The search found only his donkey and blood-stained garments. The donkey refused to talk without a lawyer present. So back to the apocalyptic prophets. They made a new plan. They would regroup in 1030 and see if anything happened. And indeed, those expecting the end of the world have been gathering at regular intervals ever since.